very much, Robert. I think it's very easy to try to set standards and frameworks prematurely, or set those frameworks in isolation from practice. And to speak to your point specifically, Robert, what I think is needed to build trust and public acceptability of AI is to co-evolve practice and principle and frameworks. And by that, I mean creating flagship trials that act as exemplars of AI frameworks and principles, and then use those to evolve those. We talk about anticipatory regulation, regulators creating sandboxes that are able to try out different frameworks that can enable different business models. And that approach to regulation, much more agile rather than heavy-handed and more like a blueprint, is something that I think we should be pushing heavily. What I wanted to say today really was more about the kind of spaces which I think AI can apply in the future, because I think we've focused quite a lot on some of the bigger sectors, banking, legal, healthcare, etc. But I think there are a range of places where Nest has been focusing, which are sometimes a bit under the radar and I think need maturing, but could have huge social impact and could have huge benefits in terms of public acceptability. So I just wanted to give you some examples to throw out there. One actually is in how you manage refugee flows. Stanford did some fascinating work with the International Rescue Committee and a number of other organizations where they mapped refugee flows across European cities in the Netherlands and in America, and through that can basically match refugees to the right city that can enable them to thrive in employment terms. And by using algorithms to match refugees to the right location, they believe that the employment rates of refugees 3 months after they arrive in the US, for instance, could be 40% higher than if they didn't. In my own work, we've used algorithmic matching to try to match refugees to jobs in Jordan. We've tried to use precision targeting to tailor the right interventions to help refugees move on. So even in the most difficult problems, I think AI has got quite a big benefit. In education, I pick out an organization called MindSpark, which has drawn on 5 billion data points to create a very adaptive, tailored learning experience, which is substantially more effective than the traditional computer-assisted learning that we've seen for many decades. In healthcare, that similar theme of personalization and early intervention is available in a whole host of different interventions. One I pick out again is Red Star in Glasgow, which is a program we funded, which is all about identifying the most high-risk diabetes patients by analyzing the thousands of clinical records they have using natural language processing, and identifying high-risk diabetes patients and providing a more tailored solution. I think many of the best applications are using the data from the digital infrastructure that's been built up over the last decade. So using smart meter data to identify when vulnerable people might be in need of support due to changes in their patterns of energy use, or using satellite technology to identify places to conserve, or even, again, looking at people flows. Looking at mobile phone data, this has been a fascinating one in COVID, when enumerators couldn't be used to identify who were the people at risk who needed extra cash payments. Mobile data records have been used to identify who's in poverty, and it turns out that you can analyze that almost better or as well through mobile data as you can through a more face-to-face heavy data collection system. I do think, as one of the participants talks about, one of the biggest risks and opportunities is around democracy. And instead of thinking about AI purely as a way of automating or taking out of existence the human component, a lot of what Nest is focused on is human-machine interaction and how you can harness the wisdom of crowds and data and put that together in what we call collective intelligence. And when it comes to democracy, particularly in the broader sense, and how you make decisions better in a way that's more engaging, I think there is huge potential as well as risk. So one example I would pick out would be Citizen Lab, which is basically trying to make it much easier for local governments to engage with their citizens, consult, run participative budgets, and make it a lower transaction cost process. And again, when I think about how decisions are made, using things like swarm AI tools to make decisions better as a group, I think is something that we will increasingly need to do if we're going to even create the legitimacy for how we use data and come to more accepted data frameworks. So I actually think that some of these tools can almost be a good way of navigating the difficult ethical problems we have. As I think we all know, the thing that's holding us back now is not the technical potential, it's social practices and social institutions. And I think that the issues we have to grapple with are, many have already been mentioned, but one I would mention is the capacity of procurers. So the capacity of local governments, for instance, to engage in these issues. And there's a big risk that they are sold snake oil or not able to navigate these fields well. Trust and data and algorithmic bias has already been touched on by others. And ethics frameworks, however, I think is something where that needs a bigger conversation that's more about engaging the public. And that's something that can't be done just purely technocratically. And then I'd come back again to this idea of developing flagship use cases in conjunction with principles and frameworks, because that's the way in which we can both inspire and build legitimacy.
Thanks very much, Ravi. Your comments sparked one question from Marilyn Kovorst in the Netherlands, which actually I quite like as a question, which is about your mention of sandboxes. And the good news is that in the Brussels bubble, the Council of Ministers last week actually developed a policy statement on sandboxes saying we'd like more of them. Will the European Commission please tell us how to do it? What concretely does it mean? What is beyond a sandbox? Because we talk a lot about let's have a sandbox, but how do you create a trustable sandbox? Because essentially you're saying in this space, regulators will let innovators play, but then what happens? Are they taken home and locked up again, the innovators, or are they allowed to do something?
Some of the bad sandboxes are just sandboxes where kids play and then are left to roam, but it never makes it back into the mainstream. But the good versions are where regulators are trying to figure out what the future regulatory framework looks like in 3 to 5 years, therefore allows derogations and flexibilities for people to play in, but then take those lessons and apply that to the future regulatory framework. But it's one which continues to evolve. So I don't think you can say, let's do a sandbox and then roll it out. This is a very dynamic field. And I think we're going to have parallel systems where there are derogations and flexibilities, and that learning is continually applied in mainstream regulation.
Yeah. So just as you were saying at the beginning that there are more deep dives to do, maybe there's sandboxing forever. Thank you very much. I'd like now to pass to one of my old colleagues and friends from the European Commission, Lucilla Scioli. Lucilla, DG Connect was present at the creation of AI4People. It's lovely that you can be with us. You might want to tell us a lot of secrets about the legislative proposals about to come, but what do you make as a regulator and the initiator of European legislation of this debate where we want these good things, we want trust, we want some rules, but we want to be able to innovate? How will you triangulate in this still complicated field, Lucilla?